and the mayor of Chicago, Illinois, Lori Lightfoot. And now, please welcome Vice President Joe Biden.
Hey, folks, thanks an awful lot. I know you are really, 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 really busy. Thanks for taking the time today to spend some time in this discussion. I know how much all of you are what you're managing right now. And these are difficult days for the country. Not only had you had to grapple with this pandemic and an economic crisis, now you have to be grappling with the horrific killing of George Floyd, the brutality of how he was treated, the way he was denied his very humanity. You know, those echoes of "I can't breathe" again echo through all our ears. Everybody in America has heard them, and I spent some time with the family. It's almost hard to believe again. It invoked the full weight of our history, though, how Black lives have been devalued by our society, and it's not only intolerable, but people are angry. I'm sure you guys are too. I'm angry. I know, and the fact is, we need that anger. We need that to compel us to move forward. It helps us push through this pain and reach the other side to hopefully greater progress, equality, and inclusion and opportunity in our country. But we're also seeing a justifiable public outrage and protests turned to acts of needless destruction in cities across the country, which are not justified. I think we all agree that the act of protesting should never be overshadowed by the reason we're protesting. It shouldn't drive people away from the just cause that protest is meant to advance, but violence that endangers lives, guts local businesses is no way forward. And as mayors, you all are responsible for shaping how your cities respond. And it's got to be incredibly difficult finding the balance between keeping people safe, protecting public spaces, while acknowledging the incredible pain and legitimate anger that is the root of these protests. So yesterday I spent time walking around my city, which is much smaller than any one of yours, Wilmington, Delaware, to view the damage. Today I spent time at Reverend Beeman's church with 15 ministers and community leaders, and some young people are involved, and talking through listening to what they think needs to be done, and to talk to people in the community, and basically listen, to be able to hear directly from them. And I know that many of you have been doing the same thing on a much larger scale, but I want to start by asking all of you to give a quick update, if you're willing to, on what you're seeing in your cities, what's driving it, and I'd love to start with you, Mayor Bottoms. And by the way, you've been incredible. You've been, I've watched you like millions and millions of Americans have on television of late. Your passion, your composure, your balance has been really incredible. Anyway, but if you'd be willing to talk with us a few minutes, Mayor, I'd appreciate it.
Well, thank you, Mr. Vice President. It's an honor to join you and my fellow mayors. Every day is a little better than the next in our city right now, but our city is hurting, and we see that America is hurting. We're seeing the destruction, and we are seeing the anger and the frustration, and we're seeing it in a very tangible way. But what I want us to see in Atlanta and across this country is I want us to see some hope that things will be better tomorrow. And as I woke up this morning and started seeing images of police officers walking alongside protesters and taking a knee with protesters, I think that it's very clear that people are being heard. I just want to make sure that their voices and their outcry doesn't get lost in the destruction.
Well, I agree with you. It's interesting to see some of the police departments almost spontaneously responding, like here across the river in New Jersey and Camden and other places. But it's tough. And Mayor Lightfoot, thank you for being with us. Would you mind talking to us a little bit?
Sure. Look, it goes without saying that these are very difficult times. When I watched the video of the killing of George Floyd, I had the full spectrum of emotions that I think many have had. Watching this poor man on the ground and literally the life leaving him, all the while, police officer with his knee on his neck, hand in the pocket, casually killing someone all on videotape, knowingly and seemingly without a care in the world. There are so many reactions and emotions that arise from that. And look, we've had our fair share of dark days in Chicago around police violence and shooting. But I do think it's important for us to not allow forces of darkness to conflate people's righteous anger and need to express themselves in their protected First Amendment rights. That's something that's sacred and that we need to support and uphold. But we need to separate those folks, which I think are the vast majority of people that have been out in the streets. We need to separate them from the lawlessness. What I'm hearing from business owners who, small business, black and brown, who sacrificed pennies every day, every month to get to a place where they could open up a building and really give expression to their life's dream, seeing that disappear in an instant. That's pain too. And we need to make sure that we are there and supporting for him. We are launching a whole array of city services to go into our neighborhoods today to help them clean up and rebuild. We made a $750 million commitment to these same communities to rebuild. And we are more resolved than ever to make that happen and really to bring more resources. But we're all hurting today. We're hurting for different reasons, but we're hurting and the pain is real. And we just have to acknowledge that and make sure that we talk to people about not losing their sense of hope.
Thank you. Mr. Mayor, Mayor Garcetti.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President, and thank you, Mayor Bottoms and Mayor Lightfoot. We're, as mayors around the country, constantly in contact with one another, late at night and early in the morning, to make sure that when we have a lack of national leadership, at least we can try to, through the cities of this country, bring together and push forward a national agenda that can bring peace and justice. It was a better night last night than the night before in Los Angeles, but we have a lot of land and a lot of people across a 19 million person metropolitan area. And we do see not only kind of the pent up pain of the pandemic, but more the repressed rage of racism in this country. And the two of those things colliding at a moment when people saw the latest chapter of this dark, dark book that we've seen. I think, especially for a new generation, what we're seeing, Mr. Vice President, is a new generation looking for its moment to do its part to put justice forward. But as Mayor Lightfoot said, the violence that others exploit at this moment, we all know is never an answer. In Los Angeles, we're no better than other places, but we went through this earlier than other places a couple times. And because of that, we came out of it better, thanks to a Obama-Biden administration and 21st century policing. And we need to get back in that agenda because there's still a lot of to-dos left undone there. But instead of going forward to 21st century policing, we have national leadership that's pushing backwards to 28th century policing. When, by the way, crime rates were higher and people were killed without a video camera around to document it. Mm-hmm. So we have an impossible task ahead of us, but it is impossible for us to retreat from it too. I would say that. The impossible task of figuring out how we bring together peace and justice simultaneously in our cities, but we will do that. And most of us are doing that on our own, with some help sometimes from the state and certainly the network with each other, but not from Washington. And then secondly, to determine, if we're midway in the mountain, to remind people what it was like when we were at the base, but to never settle for the idea that we can't get to the peak and that we're okay where we are, because we're not. Black men are dying. You're more likely to be homeless in my city, sick in my city, underemployed in my city, undereducated in my city, if you're Black than if you're not. And the last thing I'll say, Mr. Vice President, is for a moment, we found common ground. I've never seen so many police chiefs speak out. I've never had so many conversations with police officers who were sickened. We had good cops and everyday citizens and young people and a nation that was united about what we saw and condemning it. And we can't let anything divide that moment, because that is the foundation of our next steps of reconciliation.
Well, you know, I noticed each of you emphasized the word hope. What, you know, when talking to folks back east here, and just been through some of these, they asked me the question today down on the east side of Wilmington in an African-American church about what reforms do we think are necessary? They're looking for, I think the way you said it, Eric, that, you know, we're not at the base of the mountain. We got midway through the mountain. We can't decide that's enough. We got to get to the top of the mountain here. And there is still systemic racism, white supremacy. It's real. And you see it. I think we all see it but if you're African-American, you see it even more clearly in almost every aspect of your life, whether it's maternal health care or whether it's access to a job or whether it's the value of the home you live in or how much insurance you pay for your automobile. And, but, you know, my experience has been that when the best way to bear heavy weight of grief and suffering is to focus on purpose. So I get asked, and I'm sure you have as well, what are the reforms beyond the broad economic reforms? What are reforms, if any, within police departments we should be focusing on? When you talked about 21st century policing, Mayor, I mean, what are your police chiefs, what are your folks in your department saying to you about what we should be doing?
Well, first of all, I'm happy to go. I think I've had a lot of conversations with my relatively new police chief, is David Brown. He was in Dallas at the time that there was a march against police violence, and unfortunately a sniper hit and killed 5 police officers there. Yep. He's now here in Chicago. And I know from my own experience in police reform and accountability, what we've got to keep doing is making sure of 2 things. One is that we emphasize the training. The training is critical. That we do bring the community into that training, that we get officers to understand that the most precious and valuable and powerful tool is constitutional engagement with members of the community. Members need to be in the academy. They need to be in promotion classes. That's critically important. The other thing that I think we also can't lose sight of, Mr. Vice President, and Eric Garcetti really said it, the fact that we were uniform, police and community alike, in denouncing this officer who dishonored and besmirched his badge. It may not feel like it, but that is a big moment that we can't forget. It wouldn't have been that long ago when something like this happened anywhere where we would not have heard from the police. Universal condemnation from police officers, police chiefs, police unions, as well as the community. That to me is momentous. And I don't want to lose sight of that in the context of the pain that we're all feeling and unfortunately the lawlessness that we're seeing. And we are there because of the hard work of building authentic relationships between the police and the community. But we've got more to do, and we have to keep climbing that mountain.
Keisha, I heard you talk about this a little on TV. What kind of conversations are you having with and your police officers having with one another and the community?
You know, Vice President Biden, what's happening in Atlanta is really interesting because of the dynamic of who we are as a city. And the reality is that we have a police force by and large made up of African-American men who have the same cares and concerns that the rest of the community has when they take off their uniforms and when they send their kids out the door every day. And so it's an interesting dynamic watching our department try and navigate this while also trying to manage it. Yeah. So what we've been doing in Atlanta, I think, is something that really could be replicated as a national model. We have At Promise youth centers from our police foundation in several of our communities. And this is not your city-sponsored recreation center. This is sponsored by the Police Foundation in our city. It's really a place of refuge for so many of our kids, and our new police recruits go into this At Promise Center at least once a week and volunteer with the kids. So they're establishing these relationships with these kids outside of chasing them down the block. And what I'm seeing from our police department and from our communities is that we wish that what we've been able to build on here is what other people in other communities could hope for and build on across this country. And it is, you know, I'm struggling for words because there's so many layers to this that we're trying to figure out in real time with our communities. And I would like to think that's why after Friday, Atlanta was able to receive some grace from our protesters, because they know that our heart is in the right place and they know that we're building upon some good work here. It doesn't mean that we're perfect, and it doesn't mean that we don't have so much more that needs to be done. But I think there's a belief that we are at least trying, and I think that's what the rest of America needs to feel.
Mm-hmm.
Eric?
Let me build on what both of my sister mayors just said. I would say three things, Mr. Vice President. One is you got to focus on how you make a police officer. And I'll come back to that. Second is how you grow a police officer. And then third, how you police the police. And there's a role at the local and national level on both. How you make a police officer is about who you recruit. And the efforts we've done in Los Angeles, our force mirrors our city demographically. The training of them, to Mayor Lightfoot's point, every officer, and it was not an easy push to do in Los Angeles, but to push through, for instance, that every officer had to go through implicit bias training. You know, the union's like, what, you can tell me all my officers are racist? And when you get to a place when, you know, I had skeptical faces going in, and then I talked to officers coming out, they're like, that was really interesting and helpful, because no officer wants to use violence or wants to have any prejudice in their heart. So they have to find a way to become a better police officer and human being. We all should go through implicit bias training, by the way, not just police officers. De-escalation training, less than lethal force, the way that we can use things that don't, you know, traumatize people. All of those are critically important. And then how do you grow a police officer? Well, one of the things we're doing in LA, we have a community safety partnership that instead of going into a community for a year or two and then going to another one, you can volunteer to stay for 5 years. So you get to know the name of every young person there. They get to know your name. The families know who you are. Give incentives from the federal government, just as the federal government helped us reduce or increase the drinking age and reduce the speed limit. That's how money should come from Washington. And then third, how do you police the police? Well, you need a Department of Justice that doesn't walk away from consent decrees. Every consent decree that was queued up, this president walked away from and tried to undo ones that were there. Let me tell you, as a city that went through a very painful consent decree, it made us a lot better. It was the hammer that we needed for the reformers inside our, back then, very different and often very racist from the very top down department, be able to make the necessary reforms. So I think those are three levels of investments and focus that we need everywhere.
Well, I'm going to turn to Mayor Carter. He's on the line now. But before I do, one of the things that we found, and back in the days when I had another job in the United States Senate, is we were reorganizing the county police. We're like a miniature Illinois, Mayor Lightfoot. We are our largest county. Has about 65% of the state's population. The city of Wilmington's inside that county. And the county police grew exponentially as the state grew. And one of the things that we did back years ago was we had the county police department set up a county police league where they actually run the equivalent of a Boys and Girls Club. It's a big building in a place called Hockessin, has all these kinds of programs where they bring the kids in, many of whom are, quote, troubled kids. The kids are having some problems. and they engage them, get to know them. They involved in not just athletic leagues, but reading program, a whole range of whole thing. And the other thing was, the only aspect that was I found, like, for example, in Camden, you mentioned, Mayor Bottoms, Camden, New Jersey, you mentioned about how what gave you hope, you got up and you saw police walking with protesters side by side, angered about what happened. Well, that was supposed to be one of the reasons why I had come up early on with community policing. It was supposedly the cops weren't supposed ever to do what Mayor Garcetti's talking about. If they want to stay in a community, the same community, for 5 years, they stay in that community. They get to know everybody. They get to know the minister of the local church. They get to know who owns the local taco shop. They get to know who's on the corner. They get to know, and they get to the point where it was working where they'd actually leave their phone numbers with, as they walk the beat, phone numbers with people so that if anything happened, they can call them directly and protect them without having to say, so-and-so said this happened. And one of the things, and I talked a little bit about this, I'm going to jump in and ask Mayor Carter here, but we talked yesterday, and we talked about how this whole idea of getting the police to know the community, to know the names. Hey, Deshaun, how are you? Or hey, George. I mean, that may be a pipe dream. I don't know, but are the kinds of things that we're talking? Is that possible? Mayor, you were talking about me up in St. Paul. Tell me a little bit about what you were doing.
Vice President, thank you very much. And I'm sorry for being late getting on. We just finished our daily briefing with the governor and Mayor Fry, the mayor of Minneapolis, as well. No, that's not a pipe dream at all. That's very important. In fact, in many ways, Mr. Vice President, this phenomenon of having police officers who do not know our communities, of having police officers who come in from different communities and don't know our communities well, is a relatively new phenomenon, as we have freeways and transit and different things to allow broader movements across broader areas. As I mentioned to you yesterday, my father's a retired police officer here in St. Paul. And, growing up, he patrolled the area I went to high school in. He patrolled the area we grew up in. He patrolled those areas. So when something would happen, we'd get calls at midnight of somebody was in a standoff and would say, I want to turn myself in to Sergeant Carter. That's the type of community policing that we want. And I'll tell you, as we figure out kind of how we move forward from this moment, one of the things that we're learning from people is our residents are choosing. We had a couple thousand members in front of our Capitol. They marched on the freeway yesterday and had a very peaceful demonstration in partnership with our police officers. And one of the things that we're finding is our residents are very willing, if there's an avenue, to speak up and protest peacefully. What they're not willing to do is return to quiet. And so we're giving a call to peace, but not patience, to peace, but not quiet, to say we are going to work together to change these things together.
Okay, I appreciate that. Well, one of the things that this is not about, anyway, we talked about also, and I know you all are tight in time, but, protesting is a natural American response to injustice, but burning down communities is not, and violence that endangers lives is not, and violence that guts and shutters businesses that serve the community is not. And you all are on the front lines, and what support and resources do you need from the federal government right now? Mayor Lightfoot, you talked about, and I think I wrote it down correctly, you talked about the city committing $750 million to rebuild. One of the things that the leader of the United States Senate, the Speaker of the House, and others have been pushing, is we've got to get back in the business of, because of the pandemic and because of the loss of significant resources you have, of funding the state's needs and the city's needs, yes, because you got to balance your budget. When President Obama put me in charge of the $800+ billion Recovery Act for when we had the financial crisis, one of the biggest things I spent my time doing, literally on a daily basis, was talking to mayors and governors all over the country to make sure they had enough people in their fire departments. They didn't have to lay them off, to make sure they had enough first responders, to make sure they had enough school teachers, to make sure they were able to keep communities whole in terms of the infrastructure that they needed. And do you think we should be doing more I'm no longer there, but the federal government should be doing a lot more? Because it seems to me it helps everybody if we do that. But talk to me if you had your wish list, if I were president, what would you have me doing for the city? I'm not being a wise guy. I know that's an open question. I'm sorry, it's so broad.
Number one, what I would ask and what we have been urging at the federal level is we've got to get revenues to replace our last revenues. We just have to. Even before what we've seen in the devastation of the last couple of days,
Absolutely.
Having businesses literally shut down that are the lifeblood of municipal governance and the services that we have to provide, we have to get revenue replacement. And it can't just be limited. I'm a big city, 500,000 more. It can't just be limited to the big cities. We've got to get it down to the smaller towns and municipalities. That's issue one. I think the other thing is we've got to get more money in the hands of small businesses that don't have a regular banking relationship with the big banks. The flaw in the PPP program is that if you have a regular relationship, a line of credit, loans and so forth, even there you're challenged. But for the small businesses that I know in my city that don't have cash flow, that don't have a line of credit, they're devastated. So we've got to get more money to the unbanked and the people that are cash businesses, the small micro businesses that maybe employ 4 or 5 employees. They're the ones that have been devastated and are devastated even more now.
And when they are, don't they unhinge the community? I mean, in many places, those small businesses, that small grocery store, that small beauty salon, that barbershop, I mean, they're the people who are in neighborhoods that are struggling. They've been sort of the heart of the neighborhood. And
That's right.
But you know, if one more dollar of any of this recovery money goes to a Fortune 500 company, it's wrong. It should not be doing that. It's all designed to go to small businesses. And by the way, most people don't think 5,000 or fewer people or 500 or fewer people is a small business. You know, they think a small business being 2, 5, 10, 20, 50 people. And and even 50 is a pretty big business. But when, you know, the House passed the bill providing for more of that stimulus. The distinguished senator, as we used to say in the Senate, the distinguished senator from Kentucky, the majority leader, says basically, let him eat cake, declare bankruptcy. I mean, this is bizarre. Anyway, anybody else, jump in about what you think the federal government should be doing now.
Mr. Vice President, if I can be so bold, I would say one of the things that distinguishes St. Paul in this circle is that we are one of those cities below 500,000. We have about 315,000 people in our community. And, you know, we are not large enough to have received direct appropriation from the federal government in light of the COVID response, but we're large enough to have very significant expenses. We have spent over $7 million. A part of that has been emergency assistance for our residents and small businesses. Part of that has been fine and fee forgiveness, where we've discounted business licenses at the city. We've asked people who've had their car in impound, just come pick up your car for free. And we're trying to just provide whatever supports that we can. We've spent over $7 million. We're anticipating a significant amount of reductions, 5 to 10% reductions in all of our revenues across the board. It's catastrophic for us in terms of the ability to just maintain basic public services. And we still, to this point, I have to say again, have received no assistance from the federal government in terms of all of those general fund assistance, particularly right now when the world knows we've all had a significant number of businesses and commercial property destroyed in the last week in light of the tragic killing of Mr. George Floyd. We have a significant need to help our businesses, and all of those funds have been tapped to help our businesses through the economy that we've seen over the last couple of months. We need help. We need it like right away. And, you know, to hear the White House and the Senate majority saying
that there's no rush on another stimulus package, that there's no rush on getting help to those Americans all over the country that are hurting right now is just insult to injury.
That's right. Well said. Well said.
Anybody else?
Yeah, I'll just say, I mean, we need constructive resources immediately, and I'll echo what the other mayors have said. And there is a part of this that has to instantly restore credibility with who we are as governmental entities with our communities.
Yeah.
And when you look at the physical landscape and the damage that's being suffered in our communities, one, there's going to be an immediate need. But there's also this very real trauma that our communities are experiencing, and we don't have the luxury of having operational budgets that we can now set aside money for trauma treatment for our communities who witness this murder along lines of murders, and we've got to be able to provide resources, psychological resources to our communities, in addition to money to be able to rebuild these businesses and to restore our communities. And I've just been reminded all day of the words of Audre Lorde: revolution is not a one-time event. And so it's going to take not just what we need to do today and tomorrow to stabilize our communities, but they're going to have to be a series of things along down the line that we need to do. And we absolutely cannot do it alone. We are already suffering with COVID-19, and our budgets are being slashed almost in half because we don't have revenue resources coming in. And to see the president of the United States say that he's going to send the military into our communities, but hadn't mentioned sending a single dime of support into our communities, speaks to where we are in America.
Well, sometimes it's best to just leave that, but I'll thank you, as always, Keisha. You've been so powerful throughout this in a very personal way, and it's such an honor to be with all three of my fellow mayors. I mean, the simple answer is money and morals. We need money and we need some morals. We need some morality. We need some leadership. And, you know, no secret who I'm rooting for to be the next president, but I root for whoever the president is at any given time, because I pray in my heart that people will speak to the nation. I would love for this president to speak to this nation, to say maybe it was wrong when I said that, you know, our law enforcement officers a few years ago shouldn't worry about people's heads when they're putting them in police cars, and had that crowd go wild. That there is a consequence to when you begin to chip away and dismiss who people are as human beings. It results in a knee on someone's neck and the life being choked out of them. And that when we talk about money, this is not their money. This is our money that we are asking to come back to our communities, build community wealth. And I would second what Mayor Bottoms said. Give us money to deal with the trauma that every child in America who is Black and of color feels. And they're taking on the trauma of past generations. We actually know how to do this. For those people say, why does somebody deserve money? Because when we all deal with our collective trauma, that is the only thing that heals us. I gotta tell you, we have programs called Gang Reduction Youth Development in Los Angeles, where we take formerly incarcerated individuals and they become the mentors to young people, and they become the bridges to law enforcement. And the trust that's established and the trauma that is erased, imagine a nation that would give grants for that across this country to set up peace and reconciliation centers in our cities. Those people on the front lines right now protesting would say somebody is listening to us finally.
Well, I agree with all of you. Look, I think, and you and I have talked about this a little bit, Eric, I think that, I think my mother used to say, out of everything bad, something good will come if you look hard enough for it. And this has been a horrible, it's been a horrible several years, but it's been a horrible last 6 months. 100,000 people dead, more than that from the COVID pandemic. What's happening now as a consequence of what happened to George. I spoke with his family. His family was really impressive. It was a private conversation, but I have permission to talk about what they were looking for. They weren't looking for revenge. They were looking for justice, looking for finally saying this life mattered a great deal. And one of the things that I think that we are like you all, every morning I have a brief with the docs, the national docs, talking about the COVID problem and the pandemic and so on. But one of the things that I've been working on for a long time, and you deal with it every day, and I got some of it from you guys, is the state of the nation in terms of its mental health. In terms of, I mean, we're going to need.
Yes.
There's an overwhelming need for mental health clinics. There's an overwhelming need for people to be able to reach out and get help. There's an overwhelming need that is, it can't go unmet. Can't go unmet. It's just going to get worse. And I think that, I'm keeping it too long, but let me just end with this and I can talk to you more, hopefully, is that I think I've said to each of you in one form or another that I think that the blinders have sort of been taken off the American people in this pandemic, and now what they're seeing is a consequence of the flat killing of George Floyd, the murder before their eyes. I mean, it was inhuman what happened, and I think they have come to realize that portion who never thought themselves as being unattentive or not caring or having a prejudiced bone in their body, all of a sudden they're waking up and saying, whoa, the blinders have been taken off. The kind of the Band-Aid's been ripped off. The scar is apparent. And I think they're ready to do something about it. I think they're ready to see some real institutional change. Institutional change relative to the whole notion of systemic racism, but also well beyond that. Institutional changes in terms of access to capital to start a business, making sure access to education, access to equal opportunity. I mean, I think they're ready in ways they didn't realize before, because they're looking at who's been carrying the country on their back. The very people we're talking about. Those first responders, those people making $6, $7, $8 an hour, stacking groceries on the shelf, making sure we get food. Those nurses who put on black plastic bags, garbage bags over them because they couldn't get the protective equipment, and so on. I mean, and they've watched how I call it the Trump's corrupt recovery, because look what's happening. 40% of all the money was intended to small businesses, went to wealthy contributors, and not all contributors, but wealthy big business people. They don't need the money. Some of them have been so embarrassed they turned it back, the money they got. It should be going to keep those mom and pop stores open, keep the Main Street stores open, keep people who in fact provide employment. They're keeping people on the payroll, small businesses. But it's not getting there. It's not getting there. And I think, if I end up getting the job I'm running for, I'm going to have a inspector general go back over every single dollar, where it went, like we did when we distributed that $800+ billion in the Recovery Act, and hold people accountable, because the people who need the help aren't getting it now, by and large. And we have to. I speak to a number of your Republican colleagues as well. They all believe, I shouldn't say all, 85% believe that the federal government has to step up and deal with money directly to state and localities to maintain their budgets, to maintain their essential services, and they have to do it now. And so I hope we collectively can keep the pressure up, because I think that I don't think this can continue without the public across the board just rising up, because this president and some of the leadership in the Republican Party are just so far off. But look, I'll end by saying, and I know y'all have got to get back to work, and thanks for taking the time to talk to me. But look, we have to build back. We have to build back better. We can't build back to what we had before. What we're seeing are all those cracks, those institutional cracks across the board, all those single women working, single moms working, no child care, all that need for help now, and is exacerbated by the pandemic, that you have no ability to stay home and take care of a sick son, daughter, husband, wife. All those things that are that we need as basic elimination of just a floor for basic everybody having a sense of dignity, being able to take care of their family in terms of their health, being able to take care of their family in terms of education, being able to so there's a lot I think we can do. Everything from fundamentally altering our education system, particularly in Title I schools, and going on to school after college, whether it's trade school or HBCUs or community colleges or four-year colleges and state colleges, that we can make tuition free. I think it's the idea that we're not doing these things is not a matter of, I say to people of means who talk to me, tell me how you're not helped if everybody's better educated. Tell me how you're not helped if everybody has decent housing. Tell me how you're not helped if every kid has an opportunity to do something constructive after school. Tell me how you're not helped, etc. And so I really think that we can do a lot. I really, really believe it. And I think there's Democrats and a lot of independents and some Republicans are ready to do it. But if in fact I make it, you guys are in trouble because I'm going to need your help getting it done. But I really do believe it needs to be done. I think we can. I think this can be one of those moments. And I know that I'm viewed as a congenital optimist, but I really do believe it. I think we're at one of those places where, Eric always kids me because I'm always quoting Irish poets, but that famous line from the Irish poet who said, history teaches us not to hope on this side of the grave, but then once in a lifetime, that longed-for tidal wave of justice rises up and hope and history rhyme. I really do believe that I said the blinders have been taken off. I think this tidal wave is moving. They realize we got to do something big. We can do it, and everyone will benefit from it. At least that's what I continue. That old expression, hope springs eternal. And thank God we have the four of you, because you're all really in there day to day in mortal combat trying to help your folks across the board. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for your leadership.
Oh, you guys are the ones in the front line leading. All right. Thanks, everybody. Sorry to keep us so long. I appreciate it.
Strength and love, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.